Well, scientists and environmentalists pretty much agree that climate change is making our world warmer. And the consequences therefore threaten the livelihoods of millions of people, mainly in developing nations. Yet, that is where the consensus ends. Industrialised countries deeply divided on how to cool the world and curb harmful emissions. And the divide, it's grown even wider at a United Nations climate conference in Bali designed to solve the climate crisis. We'll be live in Bali in just a moment, but first this report from Stepfasten.
He's the closest thing the fight against climate change has to a rock star. Fresh from receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Al Gore arrived in Bali to address the United Nations Climate Change Conference. The former United States Vice President didn't hesitate to name and blame.
My own country, the United States, is principally responsible for obstructing progress here in Bali. We all know
Al Gore urged the world not to wait for the US to catch up to world opinion.
I don't know how to tell you how you can find the grace to navigate around this enormous obstacle, this elephant in the room that I've just been undiplomatic enough to name.
Gore spoke on the same day. The UN climate chief warned that a deadlock between the US and the European Union over emission cuts threatened to derail the talks.
A number of issues have been taken into the high-level segment and have been linked to each other, that we're in a way in a kind of all-or-nothing situation, in that if we don't manage to get the work done in time on the future, then the whole house of cards basically falls to pieces.
The European Union is taking a tough line here. They want specific and binding targets on climate change, aimed at tackling the problem here and now. But the US is unwilling to commit to any targets.
We don't have to resolve all of these issues, these last items that I've mentioned to you here in Bali. What we need now is a solid Bali roadmap, one that sets the stage for robust, constructive, and groundbreaking negotiations in the months ahead.
It would be a major blow if the UN climate change conference here in Bali collapses. So at the end of the road, there should be a deal, even if it's a very vague one. While leaders argue, the world waits. Earlier on Thursday, a local Bali conservation group released 200 sea turtles into the ocean. They say a slight increase in sea level will destroy their nesting grounds. But not everyone here shares that sense of urgency. Every day, while the deadlock lingers, increasing amounts of carbon dioxide are pumped into the atmosphere, contributing further to climate change. Stepfasten, Al-Jazeera, Bali.
Well, what are those sticking points? Let's take a closer look now. The European Union wants a new target for developed countries. Cuts are between 25% and 40% from their 1990 levels, with a deadline of 2020. That goes much further than the Kyoto Protocol, which runs out 5 years from now. But the US, Canada and Japan are refusing to commit to a binding agreement, and they say that developing nations should also be included in any deal. Well, those emerging economies like India say they're not ready for targets and that under Kyoto, rich nations agreed to help them clean up their act, but that little has happened. For more on the quarrel, we're going to Bali now. We're joined by Keith Allott, who's the head of climate change at the Worldwide Fund for Nature. The head of the US delegation said, hang on, there is a hurry, but you can't make us do this right now. It's a start. Isn't that a good point?
I think we need to see real movement now. This has been the year of climate change. The world's leading scientists, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have made the case absolutely unequivocal. Climate change is happening right now, and we have a narrow window of opportunity to stop it before it becomes truly catastrophic. That means we need deep cuts from developed countries to lead the way, including the US. But we need to move now. We are running out of time.
Cuts of 25 to 40% are clearly unrealistic.
It's not unrealistic at all. There are many countries that are already committing to that target. The EU is fully committed to that target. Germany is committing to a 40% reduction. The UK, likewise, going for a number in the upper 30%. There are many countries that can do this with the political will. We have conducted many studies showing that it can be achieved at a very affordable cost. What is missing is the real desire to make it happen.
If you can't force America to do this, how do you persuade it?
Well, we're seeing America moving. There is a big difference between America and the Bush administration. There are two Americas. There's today's America and tomorrow's America. Unfortunately, we have to wait for another year before we hopefully have a more progressive administration which can fully engage with this process. But at the moment, the Bush administration, as we know, has blocked this whole process for 10 years. And it's now in its last year, it's in its dying days, and it's still trying to block the process. We regard that as unacceptable. We have the clearest signal possible from the world's scientists, from the world's most progressive developed countries, and from the developing world who are already feeling the impact of climate change, who want to move, who want to make their contribution towards a cleaner energy future which will protect the planet.
I know you're probably going to talk about some kind
of
apocalyptic future if something isn't agreed in Bali, and I'd like to come to that in just a moment. But let's pick up on something that the UN Secretary General said quite recently. He'd like to see a 50% cut in dependency on fossil fuels by the year 2050. That includes oil. How's that going to be possible?
How is it going to be possible? There is a huge potential for energy efficiency in all parts of our economy. There is huge potential for renewable energy, newer, cleaner technologies which can generate power and energy in a sustainable way with low carbon emissions. What we need to do is just to create the frameworks to make those technologies come forward on a large scale. It's waiting to happen in many countries, even the UK. I work in the UK, and many times we criticise the UK government for its slow progress. Just this week, the UK has announced 25,000 megawatts of offshore wind power. That is a huge contribution to shifting the UK onto a cleaner energy path. Many other countries are doing the same thing. There's huge potential there. We just need to have the will to deliver it, rather than
that
living
will,
in the past.
in many cases, isn't there at the moment. The United States, Japan, Canada, amongst those who are reluctant, India too. What will happen if they don't follow your yellow brick road?
There are several outcomes we could see in Bali here. One outcome is that we may end up with a process, a roadmap. We ask, what is the use of a roadmap which doesn't take you to a destination? If the world is serious about avoiding very, very serious impacts, we need to act now. Nicholas Stern made clear that the costs of acting, and there will be some costs, but the costs of acting are greatly outweighed by the costs of inaction. The world heard that message loud and clear from the Stern Review a year ago. Now is the time to begin putting our money where our mouths are and investing that small amount in protecting all of our futures.
Keith Allen, thanks very much indeed.
The reason for that, thank you.
Well, gun battles and mortar attacks have left at least 17 people dead in Somalia's capital. Rockets slammed into Mogadishu's largest market, killing 12 and wounding dozens more. 5 others were killed in gunfire elsewhere in the city. Well, this happened just hours after a national security official said that Islamist fighters are regrouping and that up to 80% of the country is outside the government's control. Bernard Smith reports.
Packed with shoppers preparing for the weekend, the bomb was lethal and indiscriminate. It came as Somalia's Director of Security warned anti-government forces are poised to launch an attack on Mogadishu. Sheikh Qasim Ibrahim Noor says that about 80% of Somalia is not under the control of the government. Islamists are planning to launch a massive attack. The bomb went off in the Bakra district of Mogadishu. It's notorious for its open-air gun market. 6,000 civilians have been killed in fighting in Somalia this year, and there are signs that anti-government forces are gaining power in the country. Last year, the Ethiopian government provided essential military backup to help drive the Union of Islamic Courts out of Mogadishu. They held power there and in the south of the country for the preceding 6 months. There's been no effective government in the country since 1991, when warlords overthrew dictator Mohamed Said Barre. Somalia now faces what the United Nations is calling the biggest humanitarian crisis in Africa. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.